right, between now and 4 o'clock, we're going to do two different things today. First, we're going to go over one more chapter, chapter 10 on functions, because I think it just makes sense to go over that. And after we get done with that, we're going to go through an example. I've got a hard copy of the example for you, and it'll lead into your first assignment. And we should, so that it means that after today, we're done with chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10, which means we've got 8, 9, 12, and 13. All right, I'm going to give you 3 straight lab periods. You're going to have lab Thursday and lab all next week. All right, and you might say after you get the assignment, maybe we'll need that. I don't know. All right, but we'll take a look in just a couple minutes. All right, we're going to get there, and I'm also going to go through a problem, so to speak, with you, and we'll take a look at that as a class. All right. So again, I'm on around page 256, something like that. I don't know. But it's the beginning of chapter 10. It's on creating functions. Now, I didn't write this down on your first homework assignment, but ideally, rather than taking all your PHP code and just throwing it into one big routine, you'll start to modularize it and put it into functions. It's like you've learned to do with other programming languages. So, they mention here that throughout the book, they've already used a lot of built-in functions. For instance, there's a function called date, which returns the current date and time. There is another one called setCookie, which does exactly what you think it would do. All right. There's one that's called number format, that you can format things with a certain number of decimal places and with commas and with currency, etc. In addition, typically you'll want to, sooner or later, you'll want to write your own functions. And you know why you write functions? To modularize a program, to break it down into pieces. All right. And, again, sometimes he just weirds me out a little when he says something like, creating functions can save you oodles of time. I don't know, I just listen to that and So in the chapter, as he says, you'll learn how to write your own functions that perform specific tasks. You'll learn how to pass information to a function, how to use default values for a function, have functions that return values, and as it says, see how functions and variables work together. Now, other than possibly Amanda here, and I don't mean to pick on her, but just that this is the first class that she's taken with me, most of the other people, a lot of the stuff that they've had in here, they've already had. All right? And it's been similar to the way things are done in other languages. Now, if I come through here, you don't need to see that, but that's just some of the YouTube stuff I was working on. But if I come through here, and I've got a bunch of PHP, so let's just say, as an example, that I start to create a PHP program. All right, this is just going to be a very simple example. So I'm going to say here, $1 equals 10. You've seen stuff like this before. $2 equal 20. All right. $3 equals $1 plus $2. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that program, and it'll, if I went and printed out all the information, it would say something along the lines of 10 plus 20 equals 30. You all get that. I understand that. But that said, there's a chance that I might want to go and add 2 numbers together. Let's just say I was doing that a lot in a program. All right? So rather than sitting there and doing this, I might want to write my own routine that'll add 2 numbers together. So I might come down here and just type in function, add 2, num1, num2, and then just return n1 plus n2. Again, I know you've seen stuff like this already. So now, instead of saying this, now I would go and call the function called add2, and I'd pass to it $1 and $2, and because I want to be a good PHP programmer and I want my stuff to actually work, I'll do that. All right. So if you look at what's on the screen right now, I'm creating 2 variables right here. I'm both creating 2 variables and initializing them with values. Then I'm creating a 3rd variable, and rather than initializing it with a value directly, I'm saying that I want that variable to hold the results of that function call. All right? And so there we've got number 1 and number 2. So those are the actual parameter names, and these are the formal parameter names. They don't have to be the same thing. What might look a little bit different is we just basically throw everything within our PHP tags. That's totally fine to do. All right. So again, I could come down here and maybe a little bit later on in my code, so maybe I've got some code here. I don't know what it is, but there's some other code. And then maybe I create some other variables. $x equals 7, $y equals 10, $z equals add 2, $x, $y. And again, hopefully then you start to see, well look, I don't have to keep writing the same code all the time. I can just call the same routine. I'm calling it here and passing it these two parameters. I'm calling it here and I'm passing it these two parameters. Again, that shouldn't be really, for most of you at least, not anything that's new. One thing that we'll get to in just a bit, just so you see this. All right. I'm going to just, not just have add 2, but I'm going to have a function here. I'm just going to call it divide 2. All right. And this will look a little different because I'm going to have $n1. All right. Now I'm going to have here $n2, and I'm going to say equals 1. All right, and this is going to say return $n1 divided by $n2. And it may, after we go over this, probably you'll be like, duh, that's not hard. But notice now if I come in here, all right, and I do this, let's say we made it 77, all right? Now instead of calling add 2, I'm going to call divide 2. Now does this make sense to everybody in here? That again, I'm creating two variables, one with 77, one with 10, and this one will be equal to the result of this. So this will return 77 divided by 10, or 7.7. Does that make sense? What may not make sense to you is I can also do this. And this will give me a different answer, but I'll explain it in a second. I'm going to say $ZZ equals divide 2, and I'm only going to pass in $X. That'll work. What I've done down here is I've given this function a default value, which says if I don't pass two parameters in, if I only pass in one, my second parameter will automatically be set to 1. So that will pass in 77 as $X, and it'll pass in a 1 as $Y. Does that make sense? You can do that in many programming languages, but PHP is a really good one for this. Again, imagine that I was passing in a whole boatload of stuff. Maybe I was passing in first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, etc. And let's say that I was doing it for a program where I thought that 99% of the people who ran this program, they were going to have a city set to Janesville, a zip code set to 53547, I think it is, and a state set to Wisconsin, as an example. I could default all three of those values. Then when I call them, I would only have to pass them if I had a city other than Janesville, a zip code other than 53547, all right, and a state other than Wisconsin. Does that make sense? Because that's a lot of what's in this chapter is what I just told you. All right, yes. The question was, can you prototype an object? And not the way you can in JavaScript. All right, but you can come in and you can use object-oriented PHP. All right, we're just not going to get there this semester. All right, will we next semester? Depends on what. As soon as I have to make book decisions for spring, it depends on which decision, which way I decide to go. That's all. All right. Does all that make sense to everybody? Because like I said, that's a lot of what's in the chapter. So you see that when you use a function, you have to use the word function, then the name of the function, and even if there are no parameters, you have to use the parens, and everything has to be inside of curly braces. Okay? Like you've seen in other languages. So this would be a stupid function, but it's a function called whatever that would literally print whatever on the screen. Right? And it won't work unless the function is called or invoked. So someplace in your code you'd have to call the function. Does all that make sense? Now there's going to be other things that we're going to see eventually, just so you know. And just to give you a little prelude, so to speak, if I do something like this, and as soon as I mention what it does, it'll probably make sense to you. Let's assume for a second that I'm in index.php. Everybody with me? I'm just in this file right here is index.php. All right. What that'll do, that's like a go-to. That literally says, oh, it's like I had a button in the function that said click me and you'll go to that page. So this is a built-in PHP function called the header function that allows you to go from one page to the other. This is the stuff that we'll go over in chapters 8 and 9. All right, when we come back after the you have lab time. All right? And there's boatloads of PHP functions, as you'd probably guess. Again, if I come up here and I literally say PHP functions, all right, and I go to the manual right here, notice that they'll talk about them, but someplace in here, and I'm not sure where it is, but someplace in here there is a list. I don't have any idea how many functions there are, but my guess is in PHP that it's in the hundreds. I don't think it has a list of them though. All right. I can tell by looking at this too, that's not a complete list. All right, for instance, they don't even have in here like the array functions. They don't even have the string functions. There's a bunch of number functions. Like I said, my guess is it's well over 100. Somewhere between 100 and 1,000. I don't know how many, don't really care. But just so you know, there's a lot of them. All right. So the author comes through here and says, you know, what if you wanted to build something like this that you see here in the book? Whatever page this is on, the bottom or the top of page 259. And you may or may not realize it, this is a little harder than you think it would be. The way the author built it is the author cheated, because the author supposes that every month that's in here has 31 days. So it was real easy to just sit there and make a loop here that went, you know, make an array that's got January through December in it and then loop through it. Make a loop here that's got 1 to 31 and loop through it. A loop here that's got the years 2010 through 2020 and loop through it. Does that make sense? But you could easily set that up as 3 different functions is what I'm getting to. Where it gets to be a little bit more hinky, as you probably guess, is you've got to work with in conjunction with the month, and February is the only culprit, as you'd guess. You know, you could sit there and create an array here that had, you know, 31 and then 29, then 31, then 30, 31, 30, 31, 30, 31, 30, 31, 30, 31. That would, you know, that kind of thing. That would work. But then you have to worry about, well, 2012, leap year, 2016, leap year, 2020, leap year. So those have 29 days in them. A couple of years ago, I gave students the assignment to go fix this. Oh my God, was that a pain in the ass. There was so much work involved than you would probably think was involved. All right? It got to be where most of them did it, but they had like 5 problems. I changed it, so it was the only problem they had. All right, and then they still complain about it. Well, what did you do? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. And then I finally showed them. They're like, well, I didn't know you could do that. Well, gee, I wrote down on your assignment, but you can't do this. Okay. All right, so they come through here and they show you how they set it up with the functions. And again, the code is in here. I don't know what that's doing. Pretty neat though. All right, I don't want that here, but I think it's something because of the PDF that I've got. There's something in there. All right, but notice when you come through here, there's months, there's the array, 1 January, 2 February, etc. All right, and all they're doing here is they're printing them all out. Boom. Then they come down here and they do the same thing with a day. Then they come down here and they do the same thing with a year. All right, but it would be possible, they haven't done it here, but you could have taken each one of these things and put it in its own function. Again, the advantage of putting each one of these in their own function is if you have a problem with the month, you know exactly where to go to fix it. Same thing with a day, same thing with a year. That's the reason that you modularize code, period. We've talked about this before many times. Okay? All right. That's why I said, because he filled it up like this. So what it came down to, when people were having problems with this, what you had to do was you basically had to set up a bunch of stuff, be they arrays or be they whatever, with PHP and write all the code. Then in here where you were filling this stuff up, you can see that the author filled this up and literally hard-coded values in there, right? The key was not to do that. The key was, instead of hard-coding values in there like that, was to write PHP, and really, if nothing else, if you really wanted to, you probably could have put it into a three-dimensional array with month, day, and year or something like that, and do it like that. And then fill it up based on that array. Okay? And no, you don't have that problem. Okay. Again, it's totally legit that when you call a function, you can pass it arguments. I already showed you that in the example. All right? I'm passing it right there. Now, just so you know, in the example I showed you here, this one, N1, N2, and I said N2 is a default value, if I do this, that'll fail. Does that make sense? Because right now, in divide 2, that's a required parameter, because it doesn't have an equal after it showing that there's a default. And this isn't what you asked saying before, but I can default everything. As many things as I have, I can default them if I want to do that. I know that's not what you asked, but you can. But the rule is, if you're not going to do that, all right, then anything that you default has to come at the end. And hopefully that makes sense, because the required stuff is first, and if you let the default stuff go first, the system wouldn't know if that's a required thing or a default thing. All right. There's a simple example. If you want to make a full name, you pass in first name and last name type of an idea. Okay. Again, I don't think that's anything new. One of the things I like about what Elman does is he shows this, the picture that's here on the middle of page 266, and hopefully if you have any problems understanding it, that helps. And again, FN, LN, Larry and Elman, Larry and $LN, all of those are what are called actual parameters. That's formal parameters. All right? And again, if that confuses you, my actual name is Jeffrey. Jeff is a nickname. And there's other people that call me all sorts of other things, some of which, I would not repeat around you. All right? But you get the idea. So the idea is that formal parameters like this, the actual parameters in here, the formal parameters that you use in a function don't have to be the same. They can be, but they don't have to be. All right. And again, in the example here, I made them number 1 and number 2 here, and down here I call them N1 and N2. All right. But I could have called them down here number 1 and number 2. That would have worked just fine. This is what the author has in here, and there's a couple things I want to mention if you take a look at this, okay? All right, right now he creates this very simple form. It's a registration form, okay? And all he's checking what is set. But there's something else in here, and that's this right here that I'm going to go over with you in just a second or so. All right, so you can see he's got a very simple form with a label for first name and then a text box, a label for last name and then a text box, a label for address, and then a text box. You can tell there's no CSS, and he doesn't have it in a table because stuff doesn't even line up. But it's fine for what he's trying to show you. All right. The idea is you click register, and you want to make sure that something is entered in each one of these. Does that make sense? All right. Pretty simple, right? Well, if you look right here and you notice, we're going to get into that more in Chapter 8, this HTML special chars. If for the first name, so let's assume then for that first name, so you'll have to pretend for a second that I've got all that stuff. We had that picture that you saw right here. So just pretend we've got this. And what I enter then for first name, instead of that, I put in this. All right, so I put that in there. I put a JavaScript line of code that just says, give me an alert that says hello, okay? And, oops, I go and run it. All right, so I put all that in, I click register, and even more than that, when I click register, what I see on the screen is not just a message, yeah, you're now registered, but I also see an alert box. It comes up that says hello. All right, what that means is there's been no input sanitization done here. This is a very insecure program because it's allowing me to put JavaScript in for a field and run it. So by changing it to this, by changing it to HTML special chars, then if I put in this that you see right here, all right, it'll actually go in and anybody, what are those called? What's that? This and this. What is their name? They're a part of something bigger. What is that called? No, they're HTML entities. Like copy for copyright, etc. But by you're right. But by putting that stuff in there, by running the HTML special chars, that converts this into this. And that's not going to be executable. So quite often when you're going through input value sanitization, you might run your stuff through 1, 2, 3, or even 4 different built-in HTML validation functions. If stuff's going into a database especially, you can't be too careful. All right. Another one that you might add for something like this is, what if I came in here and put this in? You know, something simple. It asked me for my, what was it? So it asked me here first name, last name. So first name, last name. It's not my last name, but let's pretend for a second that it was. All right. So let's say that was my last name. All right. Well, this can be problematic. That character. I want it to go into the database. Okay. I want it to go into the database, and I want it to go in like this. But it might be, if I try to put that in, it might wreak havoc if I've got a bunch of other single quotes or enter double quotes into the system. So what I want is I want to make sure that for now it looks like this. Does that make sense? But I want to make sure that even though it looks like that once it goes into the database, I want that removed or stripped. Does that make sense? So the way I do that is there's a couple built-in functions, one that's called add slashes, all right, and one that's called strip slashes. To either add the backslash before it or remove it. And a lot of times you'll add it, but then before you write it into a database, you'll run the strip on it. Okay, it's not remove slashes, it's strip slashes. All right, these are all things that are discussed in the chapters we haven't gone over yet, but I'm trying to mention them for consistency's sake. All right, that way when we do go over them later, hopefully at least they'll make some sense to you. So notice what the author tries to do here. He's got his own function that he calls make text input. And notice as it says, this function requires 2 arguments be passed to it. One is the name of something and one is some kind of a label. All right. Why is he doing that? Well, he's basically setting everything up so that what you saw here, first name, last name, etc., rather than having to write those things out directly himself, he's letting a function write them out for him. So that's going to be the name, and that'll be the label that goes along with it. That's the name and the label that goes along with it, the name and the label that goes along with it. There's nothing wrong with the example that he gives. I guess I never thought of doing it like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it like that, but I think you could have come up with a better, simple function example than the one he showed. But still, like I said, I'm not trying to, I'm critiquing him. I'm not criticizing him. All right. The default stuff, again, we've already talked about. Okay. Now, he gives a real simple example where he prints this out. So this calls greeting, and if you call greeting and you pass it something like Zoe, it'll say hello Zoe. But if you just call greeting, it'll go to the default value and it'll say hello world. That's an even simpler example than the one that I showed you. All right, and again, you can default just about anything. You can default string variables, you can default numeric variables, you can default Boolean variables if you want to. All right, there's a lot of different things that you can default. And again, depending on the circumstances in which you're doing this, it may or may not make sense to do that. All right. And notice what he's doing in here. So he's got a default value. If you don't set up the size, it'll automatically be set up to 20. And that actually is kind of important just because of the fact that if you're making a text box, they'd all be 20. But for example, if you had one, and maybe I'd make it bigger than that, maybe I'd make it 40. But if I had a text box where you were supposed to enter an email address, and I thought a lot of people were going to have big email addresses or big URLs, I might want to make it bigger than that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because it's really important, because that's an example of where it'd be a good idea to have a default value. If I was going to have 15 fields, there might only be 2 of them that I want to be a size other than 20 in this example. So the default value would work for 13 out of my 15 fields. And that's the kind of thing that you should think about when you're programming, is to try to make things as simple as possible. And I'd also get some uniformity by doing it that way. I'd be sure that those other 13 fields would all be the same length. Plus it'd be a little less code I'd have to write. All right. All right. You can have functions that return values. There is no return, or just, as opposed to return with a value. If a function does not return a value, you don't need the word return. All right, when it gets to the end of the function, it'll just return automatically, or you can put the word return with a semicolon. All right, but you can return, and you can only return one thing. So notice what they're doing in here. Notice also the function prototype for this. Remember, this, for lack of better words, since this is a loosely typed language, it's a typeless language, right? So you say function, but you don't have to say the type of value you're returning. Like you do in Java, for example, where there you'd have to put string or whatever. You don't have to do that. All right. So we're concatenating or gluing the 2 things together and then returning the glued together thing. All right. Again, hopefully this has been a lot of review. That it's like, yeah, it does not very hard, etc. Again, we talked about this in an earlier chapter. This is in the book on the top of page 277. How to return multiple values in PHP. All right, it says user-defined values frequently return just a single value, but you can return multiple values by using arrays. All right, so you can return as many things as you want, even if the things are non-related. All right. Notice it says return array, and then you fill up all those values. Now, they're in an array right now. So if you want to unarray them, whatever you call it, you use the list function. We did see this in an earlier chapter, and you're seeing it again here. This is one of those things, if you do dog-ear a page of a book, or put an X by it, this is one you might have reason to use. All right. Also, I want to make sure you understand this, because this is a very important line that we're going to look at in just a second. All right, in blue right there, it says begin with a conditional to see if the form was submitted. When you say this, if $server request method = post, this is what's going to allow us to put both the post part and the get part of our code in the same file. In English, what this is saying is, did you press the submit button? If you click the submit button, then the server request method is going to be post. If you did not click it, it's going to end up being get. So if you look at it this way, and I'm not going to draw a picture or anything else, I don't think I could really draw one, and besides it wouldn't help much for people who are watching the tape, but just so you know, if I sat there and at the top of my program I wrote a bunch of PHP, all right, and the idea was there's a ton of PHP at the top, and I've got an if statement that has this in here. That means if the person has clicked the submit button, do all this stuff, or attempt to do all this stuff, then underneath that I'd have my HTML code with my form in it, the same form that I'm going to be using this code in. That way the form can just go and literally can just go back to itself. All right, the action can be just tell it to stay on the page that it's on. And you're going to see that in just a couple minutes. That's what we're going to do. Here's an example of some of the built-in is numeric type of functions. We've talked about that stuff before. All right. Variable scope. Talked about scope before in other chapters. One thing, just so you know this, again, if you don't look up on the screen here, not at me, but at the screen, this right here, that means the current page. That's a way of saying current page. If you want to keep the person on a current page, if you want to move them, etc. You might say, well, do you have to use that? It depends on the circumstances in which it's being used, but the bottom line is $_server, then inside of brackets like that, single quote PHP _self, all in uppercase, the whole thing. That means the current page. If you echo that out, just a second, if I was on index.php and I echoed that out, it would come back and say index.php. Does that make sense? All right, go ahead. It depends on how it's written, but that's one way you can keep a person on the current page. All right, so I'm not answering your question, but I'm just saying there's a lot more to it than that. You can keep somebody, but you can literally do the equivalent of disable the back button. This would be a way of doing it. If you said no matter what, you're going to force them to be on this page. That would be a way of doing it. Okay, this is an important topic too. I'm glad I didn't just skip that. And it's talking about the thing with global. I want to show this to you, and please take a look at what I'm going to put up here, and please, if it doesn't make sense, please say something. All right? Now, okay, let's say that I come in here, okay, and I come in here, boom, I've done all that really cool stuff like that, okay, and I don't want to pass either one of these, okay? So I come through here and I say, now I've got this thing here that's called add to, and I don't have anything in there anymore, and I return this. What do you think is going to happen if I do this? Right here and right here. Anybody want to take a guess? Probably I'm not going to get an error message, because probably at least what's going to happen is I might get an error message that says N1 and $N1 and $N2 aren't yet created. I might get that. Or it'll create new variables there, make them both 0 and return 0. It's going to do one or the other. I don't know. I don't really care. But let's suppose that what I want to do is I want to be able to use these two variables without passing them. Everybody with me? I want to use $1 and $2, but I don't want to pass them. Okay? The answer, the way is I can do that, but then I've got to come up here and I've got to say this. And then I would have to come down here and make this. Oops. You have to use the global statement. What that means is these have been defined someplace else. Compiler, you go out and find where. Okay? Now, I'll take your question a second, but this is the important part. Now if I go through there, let's say I do this. Right, so I've gone through here now and I've said global $1, global $2. Now I change their values. It's going to add them up and it's going to return 171. Does that make sense? And since I'm using the global, it's now permanently changed these two variables to 71 and 100. That's kind of the equivalent of pointers that you have in PHP. Question? It depends on the language. All right? Yeah. But the point is, what PHP expects is that if I come in, remember there's no var statement. So if I come in here and do it like this, and let's just say I didn't have these, okay? Then it would come back and it literally would return 171. It literally would, but it wouldn't change these two values. They'd still be 10 and 20. That would be very confusing. Because if I print it out, now it would say 10 plus 20 equals 171, which I would at least find very confusing. So it's a very important section that they have in here talking about global scope, just so you're aware of that. I would take a look at it. All right. Make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did. So again, he comes through there. There's tax right there, and then he says global tax, and then. Well, right here, he's just using it. He's not changing it. But if you define a variable up there and you've got it down here, what you're saying is I'm using the same variable. Right? And to go back to Zane's point before, really the idea is you should have very few, if any, global variables ever defined in a program anyway. So this is the program that he does in the chapter. He's got this little calculator that he creates, where you can have a quantity. I think they're all the same price, and you click calculate, and it tells you how much they would cost. Right? There you go, quantity and price, whatever. And he passes the tax rate in because he just figures it's set. The last thing that he discusses in here, and I'm not going to read this to you, but he talks about function design theory, and it goes back very similar to what I mentioned before. All right? And what I mean is the idea is that you modularize code. And if we're all writing the same program in here, so we've got it broken up into a bunch of different pieces. We're all writing the same program. We can write them, and if I've got something that does input, and John wants to use it, he can use it and not even know how mine works. He doesn't have to know because it's a black box to him. That's the mentality. And literally a black box, much of it gets its term from the system unit here, where you've got that black box and just magical things happen. All right? And it's the same kind of an idea. All right? And that was it. But what I want to show you, and I'm going to give you all a hard copy, so I'm going to take the headphones off for a second. This is a simple example that I gleaned, which means stole from online. And I did pretty up a little bit. I had a few things that were not in the example, so I'm going to show you where I've changed it. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to run it for you, okay? And then we're going to go back and kind of, first I'm going to run it, then we're going to kind of come back, for lack of better words, and kind of decompose it, whatever you'd want to say. All right, so it's called test.php. So I've already got XAMPP up and running, http://test.php. Oop, I need localhost. All right, and that's what it looks like when you run it. Not real much, not a lot to it, but notice what happens, because this is what I talked to you about before. Notice now when you click submit what happens. See how you get the error messages and you get them right there. All right, I was sitting there dinking around with the program that I wrote for you and doing the same thing, and it was really ugly. All right, I can show it to you if you do want to see it. Yeah, I've been working with it, with all the different stuff that's in there. But also notice if I come in here, name's a required field. And all it says, you can have letters and spaces. But if I put in this, you'll see what will happen in a second. If I put in an invalid email and I put in an invalid website, the comment doesn't matter. This is cool. And if I do click gender, notice how these change here. Only letters and white space allowed, invalid email format, invalid URL. All right? It's always nice when you do something like this, all right, when you do something like that, to literally let people know what field is going to be required. Now, it's pretty easy if every field's required to put a message at the top that says all fields are required. All right? But when you look at this too, now notice I'm going to fill it out all valid. So now everything's valid. So that stays there to let you know that there's still valid fields, and then on the bottom it prints out the information that was entered. Does that make sense? All right. So I want to take a couple seconds in between now and about 4 and go over this, because there's a few things in here that you may or may not have realized are in here. First of all, to keep it real simple, that's the only CSS that's in here. So it's literally in there in a style tag. It could have been in its own CSS file, but since that's all there was, I just put it in like that. All right, which said again, if the class is error, make the font color red. Pretty obvious, I think. You know, if we wanted to, we could have font weight bold, for example. We could have done that. Maybe that would have looked a little nicer. All right, now it's bolded. If you want to do that, that's not that big a thing, you know, in the mainstream of things. So a couple things. And none of this stuff that I'm about to tell you right now is all that important, but I just want you to hear them. All right? All right, let's say that I'm the world's laziest PHP programmer. All right? I just want you to know that if I did this, for example, and I'm going to just stop right there just because I'm out of room. All right? I literally, now I put it into 2 lines. I literally could have put it all into 1 line. And all I want to mention to you here is when PHP does assignment, the equal sign, it goes from right to left. So this says take the empty string and assign it to website. Take whatever's in the website and assign it to gender. Take whatever's in the gender and assign it to email. Take whatever's in email and assign it to name. Does that make sense? Now you might say, well, that's what you did. It is a lot more work. Yeah, but to me, it's also much more self-documenting. And considering the fact most people, including most of you, sorry, don't put a boatload of documentation in your code, I think that the way I'm showing you there is a better way of doing it. So that's why I'm asking you to do it that way. Okay? End of that sermon. Now, what are we doing here? Well, we're just asking if you've just clicked the button. Have you posted? And then what are we doing? Well, we're coming in and we just used empty, which is another one. Empty is set, etc. There's a bunch of them. We've talked about that before. Really what I should have done, I believe right now the way this program is set up, I'm going to run it again. So let me just remove everything. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'm going to hit the space bar a few times, and I'm going to come in here and hit the space bar a few times. All right, submit. Would you agree it didn't give me any errors? There's not, you know, all my error messages and stuff went away, right? So what I really should have done is, rather than just checking for empty, what I should have done is I should have said trim $post. All right. That way, by just adding that trim in there, now if I run that again, all right, and put it up again, now, see how I get name as a required field? Because it trimmed off the excess. I'm going to expect you to do that. Now, I may or may not have put that into your notes, but I'm expecting that you all understand that you should run a function like trim on your input. All right. Kelly had asked the other day in one of the other classes about sanitization and security and the like. This, one way that you can try to make sure that your code is secure is to not let garbage in to begin with. There are rules that should be followed, and most people, all right, if you make it apparent enough to them you're screwing up, they'll do, if they want to stay on your site, they'll do what they can to not screw up. All right, and again, I said this to you before. Right here, all this is doing is it's saying, okay, if I'm using email, is that a valid email address? It doesn't say, does that exist? So to my knowledge, there's no jscott12345 at blackhawk.edu. But notice if I put that in there, all right, and I submit, it's still fine. Because all that's doing is it's saying, has that email been formatted correctly? That's it. So like if I come in here and I go www.whateverthehell.com, there might be that. I don't know. But notice, boom, it worked. So all this is doing right here, there's only a certain amount when you're validating that you can validate. So all we're validating for in here is format. Is that a valid email format? Is that a valid website format? That's it. All right, and name, notice that something that doesn't work, I showed you this before. I think this one fails because it only allows letters and white space. All right. So notice it still is critiquing, it's still keeping track, sorry, let me get rid of that, of what's entered down there. It still says Jeff O. Scott, it's just that it didn't take it, all right, as far as being acceptable. All right. So then we come through here, so if we hit this else, all right, what does that say? Name was not empty, right? All right. So we come through here and we run this thing called test input. What's that doing? I did it because I wanted to include a function in here. All right, so what does test input do? Well, it's down at the bottom. That's what's doing the trim. All right, and it's doing strip slashes to get rid of anything that might be in there that shouldn't, and it's doing the HTML special chars. It's trying to sanitize the input. I made that comment a while back, how Doug said that when the student asked, how do I keep my computer totally secure, and he said, never turn it on. Well, in much the same way, there is no such thing as totally making your input secure. All you can do is try to batten it down the best you can. All right, but as always, there's no accounting for human stupidity. There really isn't. So what we're going to do is after we've done this, all right, we're saying name equals test input. So we're passing it that. So by the time we get it back here, it should be cleaned up of any garbage that's in there. So you got a regular expression pattern, all right, starts with that, ends with that, which says one or more letters or spaces. Does that make sense? And the good news is that says we can have spaces, but the spaces can't be at the beginning because trim will catch those. You can't have spaces at the end because trim will catch those. But any spaces that are in between, trim will not catch because it's not supposed to. Does all that make sense? All right, and if the check doesn't work, you saw that name error already. All right, only letters and spaces, white space are allowed. All right, then we do the same kind of thing with email. Again, we check and see if it's empty. All right, we say it's a required field. Otherwise, we again call test input. All right, and you might say, well, up here, I did the trim. Did I have to do that? The answer is no. What we could have done first, I'm calling test input only if it wasn't empty, correct? But if I want to trim it first, I could have taken that line that you see right here and moved it up here. And then it would call it all the time. That probably, now that I look back at it, would have been a much cleaner way of doing it. All right, does everybody understand what I just said? So what I'm saying is I really should have taken this and moved that up here. Because now I don't have to check for trim because I've already done it. So I can get rid of that and that. That would have been a cleaner way looking back at it. All right. And then we do a similar thing. Like I said, this is a built-in PHP function that sanitizes email to make sure that the email is in a correct format. All right, so again, where I've got the call to test input, same kind of thing. I really should take that line and just move it right up to the top. Right there. All right. And then again, do the same thing with website. All right, like that. And I'll tell you what, I'll take the one that I finish up with and I'll just throw it out there on the system when we get all done. All right. Does all the PHP that's in here, because it's all doing the same thing, does it all make sense to people as far as what's going on? Now, with gender, again, this should make sense to all of you, that if I came in here and I typed in selected, or what I think it's selected for radio buttons, not checked, I could have it set up so it always one of them was on, correct? Then I wouldn't even have to do any validation there. I mean, if I say Jeff O. Scott and I put female, the system has no way of knowing, no, Jeff's a male name. I could do that and give it, you know, names of males and females, but there's so many different names. You've got names like Chris, you know, it can be, my daughter's Taylor, my other daughter's Mackenzie. They, for years, have gotten male Mr. Taylor Scott and Mr. Mackenzie Scott, you know, to my house all the time. Oops. All right, so that gets us down to the HTML, down at the bottom, starting in line 99 and going down for about, you know, forgetting about this stuff here because that's just echoing it out, for about 40 or so lines. Again, I put it in a table just so it would be prettied up a little bit. All right. Anything that I wanted to print out in red, I put class equals error in front of it. So notice if I highlight that, if I, you know, click class equal error, you can see all of them have the class equal error. Nothing special there. That just made the stuff stand out in red, right? Now, what you may or may not have seen before is the stuff that's here. Can somebody tell me in English what that means? The stuff that's in gray up on the screen there in line 107? If there's something in it, echo it out. If there's nothing in it, there's nothing to echo out, right? What that does when you see this is if I make a mistake in here, all right, I get the error messages, right? But my stuff stays in there, i.e. it's sticky. All right? And that by putting that in here, a statement like this, so value equals, and notice then I'm in HTML. I've got to go back into PHP and inside of my double quotes, and it could have been single, no, I wouldn't want single quotes there because then echoing out $name would have put $name instead of the actual name. All right. But putting this in here for the value is making that particular field sticky. All right. And we do the same thing for everything else that you see in here. So like I said, I'll clean this up a little bit. You've got a hard copy, all right, and I'll give it to you. Now, I'm going to hand out one more thing, so I'm going to take the mic off again. This is your first assignment. So if there's anybody who's not here, I'll put it out on the system, but I'll put it up on the screen in just a minute. This is only right now. I haven't stuck this out yet onto E drive. I haven't stuck this out yet onto Blackboard. Put out there together. So I want to take a minute and go over this, literally a minute or two, and then you have your break, and then what you do after that, whether you leave, whether you stay, is totally up to you. All right. So I want to go over the homework assignment with everybody, and where did I put it? You can see I've got to clean up the desktop a little bit, but all right. So here it is. Let's just take it from the top. Again, I did not put in here. I did not put use functions. You know, user-defined, write user-defined functions where appropriate. but I thought that you would all know to do that. Okay, I'm thinking that's not assuming too much on your part. All right. So, using the file I just gave you, I'm going to let you clean it up. All right, so in other words, when you look here, and what I'm about to show you, you don't have. All right, so I got to remember what I called it. That's all. It's in here someplace. I think it's here, but we're going to find out. So that's what I fit, that's how I changed mine. All right, and notice, is that pretty obvious? That's what I want you to do. Does that make sense? There's not a lot of work on your part. It's just moving stuff around, and I wanted you to get used to the intermingling of PHP and HTML. That was the idea behind this exercise. So I gave you something very similar, and that's what we just went over. You can use that as a template or whatever if that helps you. All right, that's number one. Questions on that one? Number two, you've done this, many of you in here have done this, for example, like in the Java class, so you already know how to do it. Just have a little program that does a guessing game type of thing. However you want to do it. If you want a text box and a button, whatever you want. All right, I'm letting you figure out the GUI. And I even set up on the top here. For numbers 2, 3, and 5, you make the GUI. Just create it yourselves. I don't care what it is. So ask the user, generate a random number between 1 and 100 and ask the user to guess what it is. If the user's guess is too high, tell them it's too high. If it's too low, tell them it's too low. And when they get it, you can tell them they got it. Now, if you want, you can keep track of guesses. It's harder than you think. All right, because to really do it and do it right, it involves some stuff we haven't talked about yet. But if you want to go ahead and try to do it, or if you figure out your own way of doing it, that's fine, but you don't have to. That was in there originally, but I took it out. All right. Next, as it says there, a prime number. We all know that it's a number divisible only by itself into 1. 5 is prime where 6 is not. Write a program that lets the user enter a number into a text box and then prints out whether or not it's prime. Then enhance the program to have another button or something. All right, and in an array, put all the prime numbers between 1 and 100. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to make sure you had a chance to do some work with arrays. All right, so as you figure out whether or not a number is prime, so again, you've seen this before, but as you go out and, so if I create an array, if I say $primes equals array, all right, and then in here someplace I would be doing my prime number calculation, okay, and let's say that I figure out that I get to 23, okay, and that I know that's a prime number. So remember, I can just go, I can say $primes bracket equal 23. That'll add that to the array. Now you might not add the number directly like that. It might very well be in a variable that you have, and you put it in that way. Okay, but I wanted to make sure you got at least a minimum amount of practice using arrays. That was the idea behind that. Okay. All right. Let's see. Joe's Automotive. This is right here. Notice I don't have the picture because I took the picture out of a book because it wouldn't let me copy the darn picture. So you've got it on yours. Okay. And I'm going to leave this up to you. And Amanda, I'll have to run off another copy of this. You can do it just like this, which is kind of the way that we did it last semester. Or what we're going to be doing in the Java classes, we're going to be building this in Java, all right, next week. And it's a much simpler interface. You can use that one too. I don't care. All right. So you don't have, you can use field sets and break all this stuff up if you want to, but if that's too much work, just take everything that's in there that's in checkboxes and just put it in one checkbox after another. I'm not that concerned with prettiness. All right. But I would like you to try to write write functions that do all this stuff. All right. Then finally, again, very similar to what we've been working on in the ASP.NET class, create a simple future value app. All All right, and if you're not in that class, I gave you the equation and stuff that you have to use in there. Okay? So, again, today, Tuesday, September 9th, we went over Chapter 10 and another example. So the remainder of the period is lab time. All Thursday, all next Tuesday, all next Thursday will be lab periods. Notice it's not due till Thursday, October 9th. I will recommend, though, I wouldn't start on this on October 8th. You know, you'll have 3 periods in here. You can always tell the difference between first year and second year people, because the first year people will talk to me and they'll come up to me and they'll go, is it okay if it's a lab period if I work on homework for another class in here? You guys just don't ask because you know you don't have to. All right? So if you're more concerned, if you're behind in Java, then work on Java. If you're behind in, you know, ASP.NET, then work on that. I could care less. All right? I do look and I know who's here, I know who's missed, etc. And I am filling out, you know, I'm not formally taking attendance. It's much easier with a smaller class. I don't have to do it. I know who's here and who's not here. All right? So again, it's due literally a month from today. Assigned September 9th, due October 9th. All right? You will have one more assignment in here once we go through chapters 8 and 9, and we'll probably also hit 11. Then you'll have another assignment, and that'll be probably less problems, probably 2 or 3. Then we'll be done, we'll go over chapter 13, then we're done with the book. Then we're going to do a project as a class. And whether that's the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do some work with you, get you to a point. We're going to build a simple shopping cart type of an app as a class. I'm going to get you to a certain point and say, now you finish it. I'm going to put virtually just about no CSS in it, because I want you to make it look the way you want it to look. All right, I don't want it where, you know, I make it, oh, well, I don't really have to do any CSS. Jeff did it already. It looks okay. No, I'd rather have you put your own stamp on it, so to speak. And it'll give us a chance to go through a lot of other stuff. All right? Questions on any of that stuff that I mentioned? Anything on numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? There's enough work. I'm not saying there isn't. All right? If you want to use it as a template, yes. And again, I'll clean it up and I'll put a newer version out there under a folder with today's date on it. No, what this says is, using that one as a template, I want you to fix the one that we worked on in class. That's this one. That's the one I want you to fix. Yes. Remember the second or so class period, you typed in this stuff? I gave you that, so you've already got this form. That's the one I want you to fix up. All right. Any other questions? All right. Again, I'm going to clean this one up and put it out there. And again, it's not that it's important, but just so you see, the file that I will put out there, I've got it. I hate Word 13. Sorry, I just do. When I'll do a save, file, save as. Yeah, but now when I go in here and I go desktop, that's when I can go and save it as a PDF. All right. The PDF that I've got someplace, I don't want to do it as a PDF, but the PDF I've got in here somewhere, I don't know where, but I've got it saved in here someplace. That one's got the picture, because I had to literally go and make a copy of it, cut it out, paste it back in, and then go back and save it as a PDF. All right. Because the package that they give me to use here, it doesn't let you copy PDFs. All right. Okay. Questions? Yeah, but it's going to do the same thing, basically. Yeah. All right. That's all that I had.